Okay, so this is Patzer's Playground episode 20. So we've got a Queen's Indian, a rare sight for the playground. So all of this is fairly normal. D5 normal move. Helps to control the E4 square. Rook C1, okay. So Black's developed in a fairly normal fashion for the Queen's Indian. He's gotten castled, he's gotten his minor pieces out for the most part. So what should Black do here? So what should Black be developing and where? So the only minor piece he does not have developed is this knight. So it probably makes sense to move the knight. The question is, where should it go? It has three choices. It can go to A6, it can go to C6, it can go to D7. So what's the correct square? What's the correct square? Okay, so the right answer is knight B to D7. And the reasoning is, well, twofold actually. One, you kind of want to help support this advance. If the knight's on C6, which looks more natural, you're actually blocking in the C pawn. Secondly, you're also leaving this bishop open. If the knight's on C6, the bishop's scope is reduced. So knight B7 is more natural, and this is a known position. But Black played knight C6. So this is kind of like the type of thing I'm talking about when I say like know your openings. I don't mean so much the actual like move orders necessarily, but like this isn't necessarily like a theory thing. It's just knowing where your pieces go in the opening. So any person who's kind of well versed in the Queen's Indian would know not to put their knight on C6. So kind of like knowing the correct setup of your pieces is almost more important than actually knowing the strict move order. And yeah, I mean, Black could have played C5, but I'm trying to accentuate the fact that the knight went to the wrong square. And again, that's not so much from him not knowing some theory or some line. It's more because he's just not familiar with the nuances of the opening. So it's more important to kind of know these things than to know, okay, in move 7, if he plays C takes D5, I'm supposed to play, E takes D5 or whatever. Okay, so C5 was played, knight B4, and bishop C2. Okay, so the question is, what should Black do here? There's actually a few tempting options. There's a few tempting options. Right, and kind of being well versed in general principles, it actually shouldn't be too difficult to kind of figure out main lines. I mean, sometimes you do need to know theory, but in general, main lines kind of revolve around developing your pieces in a natural fashion. So if you guys aren't sure about the right move, can you at least suggest some possible moves? So what are some possibilities? So TK is suggesting knight takes c2, which is certainly tempting. Is there anything else that's tempting? So Zwish likes to take on a2. That's also tempting. Is there anything else tempting? Okay, you can take on c5, also tempting. And also bishop a6 to prevent castling and to get on the long diagonal. Yeah. True. Well, you don't have to take on c5 twice, Zwish. You can take on c5 once. No one's saying you have to take twice. But okay. So, which move is best? So it turns out that the right move is simply to just take this pawn and retreat. And you basically get a free pawn. So what turned out happening in the game is that black played bishop a6, which looks good, but actually white can neutralize this. And so, how does white neutralize this? So first thing white has to do is to kick the knight. Okay, so kick the knight. And now, also by kicking the knight, we defend our pawn, obviously. Okay, so now black has a couple of choices. He can either take on c2 or play knight d3. So taking on c2 is probably best, but white should be fine there.
Check.
Instead, black played knight d3, which looks reasonable. After take, the bishop is still preventing black or white from castling. Okay. The problem is, what should white play here? So yeah, white now has this strong move knight e5 at its disposal. Now this bishop is actually running a bit short on squares. So the bishop obviously would like to try to keep this diagonal. So move like bishop b5 or bishop a6. But in either case, white can either play queen b3 or queen a4, chase the bishop again. And there's potential fork looming on c6 as well. This rook's coming into the picture after c takes b6 as well. And I'll always be able to castle eventually. If not, actually, I can castle by hand with like f3, king f2, and my king is actually quite safe. And the pawn on f3 takes away jumping squares. So this is actually turns out to be better for white, because black's a bit cramped here. And even though his bishop's outside the pawn chain, white has a nice initiative. So by simply taking an a2, black could have just won a pawn. But okay, white didn't do that and played rook c3. And now the bishop should probably go back to b5 as opposed to a6, so that queen a4 isn't an option. Because on bishop a6, queen a4 is a bit annoying. You probably have to go like bishop c8 or something. So But black played bishop a6, and now c6. Kind of locking it down. So this pawn is a bit of a burden for black, but nothing too serious. And now notice this rook doesn't actually have this open file anymore. But black is severely cramped. Okay, so 94. Bishop takes e7. Okay, and now what should black play here? So this one's kind of easy, but it's not one of those automatic moves. So you think, oh, okay, bishop takes bishop, I'll take back. But always ask yourself, do I have something else? And especially when you're threatening a piece such as a rook, you can do something else. So here actually you can just win the exchange with knight takes rook. So notice white took a bishop, so white was up a bishop, but now we took a rook. So now we're up the exchange. And now no matter what white does, will be up material. So like white, if he takes the queen, we take the queen, and now our knight gets out on b2. So say bishop c7, for example, knight b2, and black's winning. This pawn's going to fall very soon. And if white simply captures our knight, we take the bishop, and again we're just up the exchange. Again, this pawn's probably going to fall soon. This pawn falls too, and this bishop is actually doing a nice job now of stopping white from castling. So that would be a good intermezzo, a good Zwischenzug, but instead black decided to kind of make the automatic move. But part of the reason why knight e4 was such a good move is because of this bishop takes e7, knight takes c3 idea. But he failed to realize that, so he simply took back. Not fatal, but could have made things easier for himself. Okay, so take, knight d2. Okay. So now this is an interesting position, actually. Black has a safer king. I'd say black has a superior minor piece, right? The bishop probably is better than the knight. But the pawn structure is a little odd, right? Like white's pawns are a little bit better, and this pawn on c6 is kind of cramping black. So I mean, I'd say black's doing well here, but he probably needs to do something in the next few moves to kind of solidify his edge, because if white is able to eventually get castled, put pressure on this e4 pawn, for example, it could turn out that white ends up being better. So do you guys have an idea as to what black should do here? It's okay, Bulletproof. That's why we're here. The person in this game, who's actually a fairly decent player, didn't see it either. And they had tons of time to think. So don't feel bad. Right. So the gut reaction is to defend the pawn and play something like f5 or bishop d3. But notice that in this position, what is white's main problem? What is white's main problem? Yeah, main problem is that he hasn't castled. So what's the usual prescription for an uncastled king? What do we usually want to try to do in general? There's a king in the middle that's stuck there for a while. What do we usually attempt? Yeah, we want to try open the center by any means necessary. So the best move actually in this position is e5. And it does involve a pawn sacrifice, but say white takes the pawn. Knight e4, e d4, queen d4, rook f8 to hit the knight, knight g3, rook a d8, queen a4. This is all pretty much forced. Now notice we have this cute move, queen d6. So we're threatening mate. Queen d2 is actually mate. So he has no time to take this because then queen d1 is mate. So we're kind of protecting the bishop indirectly. So queen c2, and now queen d4, cute move again, exploiting the pin. And here, black is down a pawn, but who would you rather be in this position, black or white? I'm gonna take a wild guess and say you'd rather be black here. Yeah. I mean, really, every single piece white owns is kind of zugzwang. Like, he can't move this guy, can't really move this guy, can't really move this guy, can't really move this guy. I mean, this guy maybe can move somewhere. I'm not exactly sure what white does here. But, you know, black can kind of increase the pressure at will. You know, he can play like a move like queen g4, try to probe a little bit, maybe play rook e6. But black definitely has all the play here. And white can't really untangle himself. Yeah, knight e2 I can play queen g4, for example. And then you can't castle it because e2 hangs. And then you're also hanging g2. So it's not easy here. Not easy for white. But, you know, even if you didn't necessarily see this whole line, the kind of spirit of sacrificing a pawn in order to kind of develop some concrete initiative against white's king should be somewhat obvious from this position, because I mean, eventually white's gonna make a move like knight c4, for example, and then, you know, threaten to castle, play rook e1 and knight e5, and all of a sudden white might be doing quite well here. So we kind of want to take the bull by the horns, and even if it, you know, costs a bit of material, to ensure that the initiative will be permanent, because the initiative is not a permanent thing, it's a temporary thing. But at the cost of a pawn, we kind of make our initiative lasting. So e5 would have been best, but okay, black played bishop d3, which is not a terrible move. Okay, f3, f5. So obviously you couldn't take on f3 because this bishop hangs. Okay, pawn takes, pawn takes. Now notice this rook has a very nice opening to the king, so this is probably not so great for white. Queen g4, queen f7 makes a lot of sense, threatening queen f2 ideas. Queen f4. Okay. So now, what should black do here? This is very, very pretty and very, very subtle. So black's actually almost winning by force here. And so the first thought, you know, would be, okay, well, why can't I just win a pawn, right? Take on f4 twice. And I won't deny that you can win a pawn, but in this position you should feel like you deserve more. Because, you know, I mean, this guy is completely out of play. I'd argue that this guy is completely out of play. I'd argue that this guy is completely out of play. I'd argue that this guy is not feeling safe. So black has a lot of things going for him, and a mere pawn is not enough. You need to be greedy in this position. And the idea suggested in the chat of queen h5 is an excellent idea. Excellent idea. Correct idea. Fortunately, it's not the most accurate, though. Because on queen h5, white can actually play this move g4. Okay, so the idea of queen h5 is to threaten mate. But after g4, it's a little tricky. You know, if I take the queen, you know, if you take my queen, I take your queen. It's not crystal clear what's going on. I mean, sure, you're better. You know, queen h4, I can play queen g3. I'm holding on by tempi, as Kramnik would say. But the most accurate is actually to simply play this move queen g6. And you guys will see why in a second. Notice that I'm attacking this pawn, but I'm also attacking the queen, of course, due to discovery. And so the only move in the position here for white is queen g3. Forced, pretty much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, now we play queen h5. And now notice, g4 is no longer possible. So this just wins by force, pretty much. So pretty much what happens is white has to play something like knight f3. And now, do you guys know what's best here? It's just kind of like a bonus thing. It's a little bit tricky, but you guys know what's best here? So you can't really take on f3 right away, because I can take on d3. But you do win this knight by force. So you guys know the prettiest way to do it. Again, it's not really too important, but just as a little aside. So the best way is actually to play a move queen b5. So notice that this pawn is kind of cramping cramping white. Whereas this pawn, you know, it is cramping black, but in a sector of the board that is not relevant. So I would say that actually black has more space in this position, because, you know, black has more space in the center where it matters. And so this move queen b5, now you're threatening this with dire consequences. And you're also protecting the bishop. So white's best move here is actually to play b3. And now we can simply take on f3. We're up a piece. And we can win. Yeah. I mean, bishop a6 is quite good as well, but this is actually a little cleaner. And again, that's not so relevant, but just for you guys who want to be accurate to the end. Okay, but instead, black simply decided to cash in. Okay, so again, like I said, this is not bad, but when you have this type of position, you know, sit on your hands and think of a better move, because even queen h5 probably would have ended the game quicker than, say, queen g6, because it's unlikely that white would have found g4. I mean, if he did, you can kind of transpose into this, but, you know, with even more weaknesses for white. So, okay, so take, up a pawn. Okay, rook f6, good move. Rook af8, good move. Okay, doubling. This is getting almost out of hand. Okay, white is basically zugzwanged, if you notice. Like, this guy can't move, this guy can't move, this guy doesn't have any moves. So white can pretty much just wait for his execution. King f7, not bad. King e7, not bad. Just getting your king in, not a bad idea. Okay, so now black to move and win. Rook a4 was not what he needed to do. I mean, not that he had moves anyway, but now simplest for black here. Yeah, e3. So the point is the knight can't move because of rook f1 mate. And if the knight can't move, well, you can take it with check. So this just wins a piece. And should have been what black had been playing for the past, you know, 6 or 7 moves. So e3 would have ended the game pretty quickly. He played e5, which is not bad, but doesn't win instantly. Okay, so he took. Okay, he's still completely winning because he's up a pawn, but this rook is still dead. So rook f3 is good. King d5 is fine.
Check.
This is good. Okay. Now again, do you guys see a quick way to win? I'm sure rook f2 does win, or sorry, rook f1 does win, but it's not as quick as you'd think. There's actually a way to kind of like win a rook by force here. It's a little tricky, but you should actually be able to calculate this line, I think. It's only 3 moves long, but you can actually win a rook by force here. Because white has to play basically only moves. So if you can calculate how white can, or how black can win a rook by force, you need to work on those chess tempi problems. So the idea is you can play rook takes h2. Okay, now the threat is rook f1 mate. So white only has 1 move, which is king e1. Okay, now you play rook ff2, pigs on the 7th. And then white plays some move. I don't even know what. Say rook c3. And now rook b2. Now the problem is you're threatening this mate and this mate. So the only way to stop both is to play a move like this. And now you just win a rook. And over. Okay, so yeah, rook takes h2 wins a rook.
Check.
Okay, but instead he played rook f1, which still wins, but
check.
Not as easily. Okay, so he trades into this rook ending, which is still completely won.
Check.
But a little bit trickier, because, you know, there's some stuff going on here. Okay, so he takes on a5, makes sense.
Check.
Okay. So this is a rook ending where black is up 2 pawns. So it should be somewhat easy, but notice that this rook is getting real active. So now he's forking 2 pawns. These pawns are far advanced. So what move should black play here? So again, this was tougher than what he had in the game earlier, but still winning. But notice this requires a modicum of technique at this point. And in general, you want to try to avoid using technique if you can help it, because things can always go wrong if you have to resort to technique. Yeah, so king b6 is actually quasi-forced here. Quasi-forced. So the point is, if, say, rook e7, just rook b3, take on e4, take on b5, and this pawn should easily be winning. Because we just take this pawn, we're up 3 pawns. If he plays rook e7, he can always play rook g5. And then if he tries to go the other way, after king b6 and takes on g7, which looks like it makes more sense, it's actually worse, because we play rook b3, rook h7, and now we simply play a4. And this rook actually has a hard time stopping that guy. Has a very hard time, actually. So this wins. Okay, but black played instead a4, which gets a little bit trickier after rook c7. In fact, it's so tricky that this position is actually a draw now, believe it or not. The problem is you lose a7 by force. If, for example, you play king b6, I play rook b7 check, and now your king has to walk away from the pawn. So relatively best for black here would be to take on b5, take on a7, take on c6, take on a4, king d5, and rook a7 is a draw. Just a draw. So black's already messed this game up once. King b4 instead. I don't know why he wouldn't just take the pawn. I mean, it's still drawn, but you have to be careful now. Okay, so rook c3. I'm still not sure why you just didn't take the pawn, because after c7 you can play rook c3. Okay, so This is the last chance. Black has to take the pawn here, right? Can't let this pawn get too far. But I think black still had some delusions of grandeur trying to win. And so he played a3. And now black is actually completely lost. The problem is this b pawn queens with check. So that's a real issue. b6, king b3. And now all of a sudden, white has mate in 8. b7, check, take, queen, check, win the rook. This is completely hopeless. I don't know what black was thinking here. Okay, I don't know what rook a8 is when he could just play b7. Maybe he forgot b8 was check. And he didn't want to lose c7. I don't know. But okay, a2. And now what should white play here? He's still completely winning. But what should white play here? Yeah, rook takes a2 is fine, but b7 also is simple. Yeah, b7 is the right answer. But white apparently thought queening immediately would be good and played queen. But now this is actually a draw. This is actually a draw. Because after take, okay, now what does white play here? What does white play here? Yeah, now white has to play b7. And now do you guys know what black plays here? Yeah, so black actually has to move his rook. Yeah, so he has to play rook b8. Looks weird, but the point is we have to deflect this guy off of this file. Anything else loses, of course. Rook c1 and queen with check. So rook takes b8, queen, rook a8, and queen b2, and there's a perpetual. Just keep checking the king forever. And if the king ever gets too frisky, you can take b7 and actually win. So this endgame was horribly misplayed by both sides and multiple junctures. I can't even fathom how they managed to come up with these moves. But of course, white didn't even play b7. He played rook takes c8. And now after a1 queen, black wins because after b7, what does black play as his saving grace? Queens move in various directions. There's a particular direction it likes to move in. It's called the backwards direction. And we do a little check, forking some guys. And amazingly, black justifies his previous play and wins the game. So I think after king e3, queen takes b7, white resigned. Amazing. Amazing. This just goes to show you guys need to brush up on your endgames, because that rook endgame was a sight to behold, for sure. Let that be a lesson to you guys. Okay, we'll do one more, because you guys haven't had enough. Okay, we're going to do a Scandinavian. This is something that's more typical for a Patzer's playground. But black actually plays it quite well. So this is fine. You can also play knight f6. It's a little bit more common, but this is okay as well. Knight c3, queen a5, one of the two good squares. The other one is back to d8. A little less common. Some people play queen d6 too, but I don't really trust that. Okay, so d4, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, d5. This is all fine. This is all fine. Knight b4,
check.
Bishop b5, c6. Okay, this is all still fine. Takes. Okay. So what should black play here? What should black play here? Ace check, please. If you want to play Scandinavian, it's okay. I won't begrudge you. Yeah, this is the second game, Corn. And I don't think I'm staying up, by the way, Kev. Okay, so here you have to take the pawn, obviously, but you have to take the correct way. And the right way to take is to take with the pawn. So after you take with the pawn, white should play bishop a4. So for example, if white plays bishop e2, then after bishop f5, it's actually awkward to defend this pawn. So after bishop a4, now cute tactics coming up. So black's best move here is knight e4. So the point is that this knight is sort of quasi-pinned to the bishop, but also if the knight moves, we have various double checks we could inflict upon his person. So white should play a3, knight c3, ab4, and now queen a4, because we're attacking his queen. So rook a4, knight d1, king d1. And after this whole sequence, it's equal. Because black has two bishops, but white's pawn structure is slightly superior. So this is pretty equal. And this is probably what should have happened. But unfortunately, black took with the knight. And now how should white take advantage of this move? What should white do? So the surefire thing to do is simply to exploit the pin with knight e5. And now bishop d7 is forced. And now we simply take the bishop, take back, castle, e6, and queen g4. And white has an edge. Because this bishop can't move due to queen takes g7, and moves like rook d1 and bishop f4 are coming, it's hard for black to untangle. So white is definitely for choice here. Okay. But instead, black decided to play bishop d2, sorry, he didn't castle yet. Okay, so what should black do here? White's setting up a potential discovery on the queen. Sorry, tomorrow. But if you just try to think about the positions the way I'm talking about them, you'll soon come to the same conclusions. Just take some practice. Okay, so what should black do here? So black should probably remove this pin as soon as possible. But notice that there's a bit of a ghost here. And this queen is actually okay here. So notice that, for example, okay, say I play a move like e6, just for example. So white does have like a move like knight d5, because you can't take this bishop because of knight c7,
Check.
right? So you guys see that tactic. But notice that on knight d5, we can always play queen d8 and be fine. So this discovery that white's setting up is a bit of a ghost. So we can actually just play a6 here. And then after, say, bishop c6,
Check.
bc6, castle, and bishop b7, black is actually doing okay. I mean, his pawn structure is a bit compromised, but again, notice he has the two bishops. This c5 move is coming at some point to open up this bishop. And again, notice that we're not worried about any knight d5, knight e4 tricks. So black, though, was a little bit worried and played queen b6. Okay, so knight e5 now, e6, queen f3. Okay, so queen f3 looks dangerous. what is the threat? Well, the threat is simply to take on c6 a bunch, right? Yeah. Okay, so how many times is it attacked? 1, 2, 3. How many times is it defended? 1, 2. So last I checked, 3 is greater than 2, so we should probably do something about that. So probably black has to play bishop d7, then knight d7, knight d7, queenside castle, a6. Okay. It's not great for black, but, you know, he's not lost. It's probably worse, but not lost. Okay, but unfortunately, black forgot to count to 3 and play bishop b4. Okay, now this just wins. You can't even really take it back because then you lose a full rook. So for example, like knight c6, bishop takes c3. Now you have knight d4 check. Defending the bishop. Bishop d7, bishop d7,
Check.
knight d7, bishop c3, and you're just down a piece for nothing. No compensation. Okay, but for as much as black can't count to 3, well, certainly white can't count to 3. So you just castle. Okay. Well, now we can get our king out of dodge. And okay, maybe white can win a pawn, but at least we're not losing a rook or a piece or something super bad. So after castle, we're actually okay. Because, okay, if white wins a pawn, we actually have open lines on the queen side, and it's actually a bit dangerous for white. So we have a bit of compensation, actually, if white decides to win this pawn on c6. Whereas before, when our king was on e8, we're just losing everything. Okay, so white finally decides to count to 3. Can't blame him. Okay, queen takes c6. Okay. So in this position, we have to ask ourselves, what is white threatening? And what is white threatening here? Yeah, so white's threatening to take this rook. He's also threatening something else. And when I say threatening, I mean it with air quotes, not really a threat, but something that black would probably rather prefer not happen. So like I mentioned before, black's main compensation here is the fact that he has some sort of attack on white's king because of this open c file and this open b file. And in general, when you're attacking, you want to try to keep queens on the board. Moreover, when you're down material, you also want to try to keep queens on the board, because the closer it gets to an endgame, again, in general, the closer you get to a situation where the pawn matters. Okay. So what move does black have to meet both threats? That is, the threat to win the rook and the threat to exchange queens. Right. So queen d8. So now the question is this move a good move, or is this just like being crazy? So that's the question. So is this move like a crazy move that, like, you know, is artificially just trying to keep the queens on, or is this actually a good move? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Yeah, it looks really bad, right? It looks like, you know, you're blocking your own rook, your queen's doing nothing. So this is the type of thing you have to ask yourself. Yeah, it turns out it's actually completely fine, and it's actually the best move. Yeah, because we're going to be playing bishop d7 or bishop e7 at some point. Whoops, not ghost piece to b7, but bishop e7. And the rook's coming to c8, and this queen is actually well posted on b8, surprisingly. It's controlling this whole b file. And at some point we can maybe play a5 or a6, and rook a7, rook b7. And it's actually not entirely clear that black won't get some compensation here. Again, it looks very unusual, but it's actually quite correct. But again, it's motivated by the fact that a queen trade should be something that black is seeking to avoid. So even then, maybe black didn't want to play this move because it looks ugly. So black, of course, decided to, okay, we can trade queens if you want. Which, again, I mean, it's not terrible, but queen b8 would have been more accurate. And it would have been more in the spirit of what's going on in the position. Because, again, black should be looking to somewhat have his pieces attack white's king. Okay, so take, bishop e3, rook b7 to defend a7, bishop a6, rook b8. So now if he takes on a7, you're going to take on a6, get 2 pieces for the rook. So instead, he takes on c8. Okay, so now how do we take this bishop back? Got 2 choices. Rook b or rook f. Got 50-50. Where do the rooks want to be? They want to be on F. They want to be on C and B or F and C. Rook B, Rook F, Rook B, Rook F. It's close. It's close, but there is definitely one that's superior. Rook B. So yeah, if you want to play Rook B, you kind of like want to play Rook F d8, right? And if you want to play Rook FC, you kind of want to have the C file and the B file. So I haven't been able to do this in a while, but the answer is you guys are both completely wrong. Because the right answer is to take on C3. And now black's equal. So be aware of tricks. Be aware of tricks. It's not fair, I know, but I haven't done it in a while, so I feel like I'm allowed. But yeah, the point is, crippling the pawn structure basically ensures equality. So after bishop takes c3, we're actually threatening to take on b2, so he has to take back. And now, it doesn't really matter which rook you take with, but probably rook f. And we're just equal. Because white's up a pawn, but, I mean, this pawn is hideous. And we get an awesome square for our knight. Put our rook on c4, we can never lose. We actually can probably play for a win. We can actually probably play for a win. Okay. I mean, we probably can't win, but we could try. We could try. Okay, so he played rook f. Which, unfortunately, is probably the wrong rook, actually. He should play this one. He should play this one. The reason is tactical. The reason is tactical. Because after rook f, black loses a second pawn here. Bishop takes a7, rook has to move, and now bishop d4 saves the undoubling. So bishop a7, rook moves somewhere, and now bishop d4. And now this is problematic. So he should have played rook b if he was going to take with the rook. But okay, white plays knight a4. Knight d5, bishop d4, rook b7.
Check.
Bishop a3, bishop b2,
Check.
take, g5. Okay, so there's some chances to draw here. You're only down a pawn. But the real problem is that the queenside majority is like 3 versus 1. If you know, say like this pawn on h7 were magically transported to b6, it would be actually a little bit easier to draw. Because you'd have 3-on-3 on the king side, 3-on-2 on the queen side. But with this 4-on-3 on the king side, you're really never going to get a pawn passed too easily. Whereas white can easily kind of get, you know, connected past pawns. So, but again, black does have some chance. So, okay, rook d4, f5, so some moves. Okay. So what should black do here? White's actually made a mistake, and black can actually equalize here. Yep, exactly right. So simply e5, which is what black did. Great. So now this rook has no square on the fourth rank in which to go. So he has to either go to d6 or d3 or d2 or d8. So he goes to d6, and now what can black play? Well, this pawn is pinned, so rook takes c4 seems good. Yay! Very good. Black played it. Okay, knight c3. g4. Okay, black's doing okay. Take. Okay, now g3, or sorry, g2 is hanging. So rook d2, f4. So now notice that black actually has a passed pawn. White doesn't. So black is actually doing quite well here. What if rook a6 instead of knight c3? Rook a6? What does that do? You want to play like rook d6 or something? Is that your point? Yeah, I mean, I could play rook d4 at the very least. I'm not even sure that rook d6 does anything if I move my knight. Like, say I play rook h4 here, and I play like knight h5. I'm not entirely sure what you're doing. I mean, maybe I don't even have to do this, but... Yeah, I mean, probably rook a6 is a better move, obviously. So... But white didn't play very accurately. But okay, so yeah, f4, rook g6. Okay. So now what should black do here? Wait for the knight to move. Okay. Well, let's talk about the pieces. If you were to classify each of the rooks as a good rook and a bad rook for both colors, what would you say? Like, which is black's good rook and which is black's bad rook? And which is white's good rook and which is white's bad rook? Relatively speaking. I mean, it's kind of minor, but... So if you were to classify each rook for each color as good or bad, which one would you say is which? So I'll point like a red arrow to the bad one, and I'll circle the good one. So in my opinion, I would say this is the good one, this is the bad one, and this is the good one, this is the bad one. Right? Do you guys agree with that? Because this one's attacking this pawn, so it's good. This one's defending this pawn, so it's bad. This one is controlling the 6th rank and threatening rook d7 ideas, so it's good. This one's kind of defending the 7th rank and not doing much, so it's bad. Yeah. So, you often want to trade your worst piece for their best piece. So this is your worst piece. This is their best piece. Yeah, defending is bad, because defending means passive. And passive is bad. If your rook is attacking, it's good. If your rook is defending, it's bad. Active is good, passive is bad. Yeah, it's not really attacking this pawn, though, right? I mean, because the king defends it well. And it's defending the 7th rank, which is quote-unquote bad. So yeah, rook b6 would be correct here. So you basically almost force a trade of rooks. Because really, I mean, this guy, where's he going to go? d3 or d8? Neither move inspires much confidence. And so let's say you have to take, and now you're left with this guy versus this guy. And now you can bring your king into the game, play e4, e3. It's tough. It's tough for white to save. But okay, black played rook e7, which also is not bad, because he's, getting behind this pawn. And, employing this rook to do better things. But rook b6 makes a little more sense. Okay, so b4, e4, good. b5, e3, good. Rook e2. Knight h5, very good. Now coming into g3. Rook takes g6, so we take. And this is actually looking very good for black. Knight d5, rook d7. Knight g3.
Check.
Rook d2. This is all very good. This is resolve, very good. Why not king G? Get the king active. No. King takes is better, though. Gets the king active. I mean, who cares if this pawn's on G6 or H7? Pawn structure doesn't matter at this point. So why not get the king closer to the game? I mean, closer to the middle. I mean, they're both fine, but I mean, there's no obvious reason why you'd want to play HG. Keeping the pawns intact, yeah, it doesn't matter in this position. This pawn's not going to have any bearing. So this is all great.
Check.
Knight e4 is a good move as well. He didn't want to be satisfied with simply taking a pawn. Okay, now he takes the pawn after improving the position of his knight. King f5, good move. See? Now it matters that the king's on g6, right?
Check.
Rook d2, good move. Black's playing this endgame quite well. So notice that his rook is dominating this other rook. So e2, good move. So now just f3 is coming.
Check.
So white gives a spite check. And now it's too little too late. Because after f3, white resign. Because nothing can be against up f2 and e1. And these pawns are way too slow. So black actually conducted the last 20 or so moves quite expertly. I mean, he got some help from his opponent. But he kind of turned a position where he was just a pawn down with really not much compensation into a position where he was actually pressing. And again, it was due to the endgame. So if you guys think the endgames aren't important, it was the cause of black almost losing a completely won game in the first game, and black winning a game that he really had no business winning in the second game. All thanks to endgames. So that's it for Patzer's Playground episode 20.